أهلا بيكم في قناة الأحياء للصف الثالث ثانوي. Today's lecture we will do a revision by answering the book questions about the hormones. So let's begin. Now, the question is give reasons. Why? Gigantism in children. Of course, you studied this. Remember that excess production of growth hormone in children produces gigantism. So it's because of the excess production of growth hormone. Okay, the pituitary gland is the master gland, of course, because it controls other glands like the follicular, like the thyroid stimulating hormone, like the adrenocorticotropic hormone, the ACTH and the FSH. So it controls other glands in the body. That's why it is the master gland. Okay, milk secretion from mammary gland of lactating female. Now remember what we said about milk. For milk secretion or production, there's prolactin. But for expulsion, I mean for proper secretion of milk, to push it out of the mammary gland is due to the action of oxytocin. Okay? So oxytocin leads to the secretion of milk from the mammary gland, not production, but prolactin is responsible for the production of milk in the lactating mammary gland. Uterine contractions during delivery. Of course, you know the oxytocin secreted from the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland is responsible for the uterine contractions. Some individuals have exophthalmic goiter. This is a type of goiter which is enlargement of the thyroid gland, but accompanied with increased secretion of thyroxine. Okay, remember there is a goiter also, increased size of the gland, but with decreased secretion. No, but this one, exophthalmic goiter, due to hypersecretion of thyroxine, it affects the tissues in the orbit. That's why it produces the exophthalmic goiter. Increased secretion of parathyroid hormones leads to fragile bones liable to fracture. What's the function of parathyroid hormone? It extracts calcium outside of bone, increases the blood level of calcium. Increases the blood level of calcium, opposing the action of calcitonin. Okay? So that's why when you pull out the calcium from bone, it becomes fragile and liable to fracture, of course. Masculinization of female. Masculinization means male secondary characters appearing on females. Okay? This is because of the increase of the sex hormones, like the testosterone, for example, okay, from the suprarenal medulla. Or maybe because of increased secretion of ACTH from the pituitary, something wrong in the pituitary leads to the hypersecretion of the adrenal gland or the suprarenal gland. Adrenaline secretion prepares the body for emergency situation, excitation, and anger, of course, because it affects the heartbeats, the blood pressure, increases muscle efficiency. That's why it's responsible for the behavior or attitude in emergency situation, the fight or flight, as you remember. Adrenaline. It's like, operating the body at maximum power. This is adrenaline. Pancreas is a mixed gland. We know that there are exocrine glands, endocrine glands, and mixed gland. Pancreas secretes the pancreatic juice, so this is the exocrine part. And also have tissues, have cells inside the pancreas, the alpha cells and beta cells. And I told you before, there are D cells too, delta cells. The alpha cells for glucagon, the beta cells for insulin, the D cells for somatostatin. This is the endocrine part of the pancreas. That's why the pancreas is classified as a mixed gland. The sense of thirst in diabetes patients. Now, thirst means water is being lost from the body. There is excess micturition, excess losing of water due to increased glucose that affects the kidneys and leads to excess, getting rid of water. That's why the patient feels thirst and needs to drink water, of the diabetic patient, I mean. Okay, some diabetes patients may go into coma. Now, this question is tricky because there is coma in case of, for example, a diabetic patient did not take insulin and ate normally. The glucose level will be very high, where this will lead to the patient will go into coma called diabetic ketoacidosis. You will study this in medicine. But also there is another type of coma in diabetic patients in which the patient took too much insulin or took the insulin shot and did not eat. This is the opposite of the first case, in which glucose there will be hypoglycemia. I mean, glucose levels will go down in the body, and the brain will not tolerate this, and this will lead into coma. So coma in diabetic patients, either by excess insulin or missed insulin dose in a diabetic patient. Nervous regulation is faster than hormonal regulation, of course, because nervous regulation, you are dealing with synapses. Synapses, depends on the release of the neurotransmitter at the synapse, which takes, a fraction of a second. But hormones, they are produced in the glands and secreted in the blood and circulates the body and takes time till it affects the target organs. That's why the nervous regulation is faster than hormonal regulation. Extract of posterior lobe of pituitary gland of cows during some cases of delivery. Now, what does the posterior lobe of pituitary gland do? It secretes the antidiuretic hormone, which is vasopressin, and oxytocin. Oxytocin responsible for the contractions of the uterus. Okay, and expulsion of milk from the mammary gland. So that's why they give it to women in labor to facilitate the labor, to increase the uterine contractions and expulsion of the fetus or the baby outside of the mother. Choose the correct answer. The gland which stimulates the mammary gland to secrete milk after delivery is, of course you know it, the pituitary gland, because it secretes oxytocin. It's not the ovary, it's not the adrenal gland, it's not the parathyroid. The adrenaline stimulates the body to perform activities needed during emergency. This is correct. Okay, stimulates the liver to convert glucose to glycogen. It does the opposite, glycogen to glucose. A breakdown of glycogen to glucose. It's responsible for the appearance of secondary sexual characters. No. Adrenaline increases the resistance of body to infection and microbes. No, actually, at the times of fight or flight, there is decreased immunity. Okay, so adrenaline stimulates the body to perform activities needed during emergency. Okay, exophthalmic goiter is due to increase in the hormone. Of course, thyroxine. What is the role of each of the following scientists in the discovery of hormones? Cloud and Starling. Now, Cloud, remember, he studied the liver and considered glycogen as internal secretion and bile its external secretion. So he's the first one who dealt with the liver as a gland. Starling, proved that there are, other than nervous regulation and regulating digestion, by studying the response of the duodenum to food, and he found out that there must be a substance released from the mucosa lining the duodenum. So he discovered the hormones. Enlargement of the thyroid gland leads to pathological features which differ according to the type of activity of the gland during the enlargement. Discuss this statement's reference to site of the thyroid gland in the human body. It lies in the front of the neck, front of the trachea, below, in the lower down in the neck. The function of the thyroid gland secretes thyroxine and calcitonin. Thyroxine from its acini, and calcitonin from its follicles, and calcitonin from cells between the follicles called parafollicular cells. You will study this later. Effect of hyper and hyposecretion of the gland on the body. Hypersecretion, we said it leads to exophthalmic goiter. Hyposecretion leads to myxedema, hypothyroidism. We studied this with the effects of the thyroxine. What are the characteristics of hormones? They take time to exert their actions. They are released in very small amounts. Remember what we discussed about hormones when we got to the structure of hormones. They are chemical substances released in very small amounts that exerts action on many parts of the body, and it's not immediate action. It takes some time rather than the nervous regulation. The pituitary gland consists of adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis. Adenohypophysis is the anterior lobe. Neurohypophysis is the posterior lobe. What are the hormones of each part and their importance for man? Of course, now this is a revision of the function of the pituitary gland. The adenohypophysis, we have the adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, the luteinizing hormone, the follicular stimulating hormone. And the posterior lobe, we have, remember what we said about the hormones of the posterior lobe. They are not formed in the posterior lobe. They are formed in the hypothalamus and descends through the pituitary stalk to the posterior lobe to be secreted from there. And they are the antidiuretic hormone, or the other name is vasopressin and oxytocin. What are hormones and their importance for man? Of course, ACTH stimulates the adrenal cortex. The thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland. The luteinizing hormone, formation of the corpus luteum in the ovary in women. Follicular stimulating hormone for the development and growth of the graphium follicle in the ovary in the female. The antidiuretic hormone, from its name, antidiuresis, means it's against losing of water. So it retains water in the body, and because of its direct effects on blood vessel, it has another name called vasopressin. Okay? Oxytocin, of course, its function on the uterus and, contractile function, and the mammary gland. Compare between insulin and glucagon. They oppose each other. Insulin stimulates, uptake, the cellular uptake of glucose, and stimulates, the storage of glucose in the form of glycogen in the liver. Glucagon, on the other hand, increases the level of glucose level and increases the level of glucose in blood. Well, that was a short revision about the hormones. I hope you got the maximum benefit from this lecture, and thank you very much for watching.